Welcome to the world of sci-fi stories, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Enjoy the listening. A warship so advanced, the Galactic Council declared it illegal. The warship hung in the void like a predator too vicious to be caged, its hull glinting faintly under the cold light of a dying star. The Ares Ascendant wasn't just a vessel, it was a statement, a human fist slammed into the galaxy's fragile table of peace. For centuries, the Galactic Council had preached harmony, balance, and restraint, their treaties binding 1,000 species into a brittle web of coexistence. But humanity, we'd never been good at playing nice. And when we unveiled the Ares, the Council didn't just flinch, they panicked. The commander stood on the bridge, his boots planted firm against the low hum of the deck. He was a man carved from stubborn grit, scared, unyielding, and tired of apologies. His gray eyes traced the hollow display flickering before him. A live feed of the Council's armada, a mismatched fleet of sleek Illyri cutters and lumbering Coran dreadnoughts, all converging on their position. They'd come to enforce the edict, Declaration 719, the order that branded the Ares an abomination, a weapon too dangerous to exist. Illegal, they called it. He smirked. Illegal was just another word for effective. Status, he barked, voice rough as gravel. The lieutenant spun in her chair, fingers dancing over the console. Shields at full, gravitic cannons primed. The Council's hailing us again, third time in 10 minutes. They're demanding surrender. Let them wait, he said, crossing his arms. What's the word from Earth? She hesitated, her sharp features tightening. High Command says we're our own. They're disavowing the Ares, claiming it was a rogue project. A murmur rippled through the bridge crew. 20 souls who'd poured their lives into this ship, who defied orders and treaties to see it fly. The commander felt the sting of it too, a bitter twist in his gut. Earth had birthed the Ares in secret, funneled billions into its tech. Nanite swarms, quantum reactors, weapons that could crack moons like eggshells. And now, with the Council closing in, they'd cut the cord. Cowards, he muttered. Rogue project. Guess that makes us pirates. Sir? Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her fear. Yes, but something fiercer too. Loyalty. What's the play? He didn't answer right away. He turned to the viewport, staring at the Ares' reflection in the starlight. It was beautiful in a brutal way. Sleek curves hiding a skeleton of reinforced alloy, its surface crawling with adaptive nanites that could repair breaches in seconds. The ship wasn't just advanced. It was alive, a beast bred for war in a galaxy that pretended it didn't need one. The Council feared it because they couldn't control it, and humans feared it because it showed what we could become. Open the channel, he said finally. Let them hear what they've got to say. The hollow flared to life, projecting the Council's envoy, an Illyri named Vixra, all shimmering scales and sanctimonious calm. Her voice slithered through the speakers, precise and cold. Commander, this is your final warning. The Ares Ascendant violates every tenet of galactic law. Its weapons threaten the stability of 100 systems. Power down and submit to decommissioning, or we will act. He leaned forward, letting the silence stretch just long enough to unnerve her. You know what's funny, Vixra? You call it a threat. I call it insurance. Your precious Council's been strangling us for decades. Taxes, sanctions, peacekeeping fleets parked over our colonies. The Ares levels the field. Vixra's eyes narrowed, a flicker of violet in the holo. You overestimate your position, human. You are one ship, we are many. And yet you're scared, he shot back. If we're so insignificant, why is half your fleet breathing down my neck? The envoy didn't flinch, but the pause told him everything. She kept the feed, and the holo winked out. The lieutenant's console pinged a second later. They're charging weapons, she said, voice tight. Orders. His jaw clenched. He'd known it would come to this. The moment they'd launched, the Ares wasn't built to bow. It was built to fight. And now, abandoned by Earth, hunted by the galaxy, it was all they had left. He glanced at his crew, saw the resolve in their faces, the quiet fire of people with nothing to lose. Battle stations, he said. Let's show them why they're right to be afraid. The deck thrummed as the Ares woke fully, its systems singing a song of defiance. Out there, the Council's ships closed in, a noose tightening around a beast they didn't understand. He settled into his chair, the weight of it all pressing down, betrayal, pride, and a flicker of something darker. This wasn't just a ship. It was humanity's last stand, and he'd be damned if it went down quietly. The Ares Ascendant shuddered as its engines flared, a deep growl reverberating through the hull. The commander didn't flinch. He felt worse tremors on training runs back when the ship was still a skeleton of ambition buried in Earth's orbital yards. Now, though, it wasn't a drill. The Council's fleet was moving, their ships spreading out like a pack of wolves circling prey. He could see it on the holo display, the Illyri cutters darting into flanking positions, their plasma lances glowing hot, while the Corran dreadnoughts lumbered forward, bristling with missile bays. They outnumbered the Ares 10-1, maybe more. But numbers didn't tell the whole story, not with this ship. Targeting solutions locked. The lieutenant called out, her voice cutting through the hum of the bridge. Gravitic cannons ready on your mark. Shields holding at 98%. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the viewport. The enemy fleet was a swarm of lights against the black, each one a promise of violence. He'd seen combat before, pirate raids, border skirmishes, but nothing like this. The Council didn't fight dirty, they fought absolute. They drowned enemies in firepower until nothing was left but slag and silence. Unless he hit first, unless he hit hard. Fire, he said, the word dropping like a stone. The deck pulsed as the gravitic cannons unleashed their fury. Invisible waves of force rippled out, distorting space itself. The nearest Illyri cutter didn't stand a chance. Its hull crumpled inward, folding like wet paper before erupting in a silent bloom of fire and debris. The bridge crew didn't cheer. They didn't have time. Alerts screamed as the Council returned fire, plasma bolts slashing across the void. The Ares' shields flared, absorbing the hits, but the strain was already showing. Nanites swarmed the hull, patching microfractures as fast as they formed. Evasive pattern Delta, he ordered. Keep us moving. Target the dreadnoughts next. They're the backbone. The ship lurched, its thrusters roaring as it twisted through the chaos. The lieutenant's hands flew across her console, rerouting power, recalibrating weapons. She was good, damn good, and he trusted her with his life, with all their lives. But trust wouldn't stop the math. They were burning through energy reserves faster than he'd hoped, and the Council wasn't slowing down. For every ship they crippled, two more seemed to take its place. A voice crackled over the comms, sharp and urgent. Sir, engineering reports a spike in the quantum core. It's overheating, pushing past safety limits. He cursed under his breath. The core was the Ares' heart, the tech that made it a monster, unstable, unpredictable, and powerful enough to rewrite the rules of war. Earth's engineers had warned him, push it too far, and it could tear the ship apart. Or worse. He'd ignored them then, betting on human ingenuity to outpace alien caution. Now that bet was being tested. Tell them to hold it together, he snapped. We don't back off now. The lieutenant shot him a look, brief, piercing, but said nothing. She knew the stakes as well as he did. They'd all signed up for this knowing it might end in a fireball, knowing Earth had already written them off. The thought gnawed at him, a splinter of rage beneath the calm. His homeworld had built this ship to defy the galaxy, then abandoned it the second the galaxy pushed back. If they survived this, he'd have words for high command. If. Another blast rocked the Ares, the shields flickering as a Corran missile slipped through, the deck bucked, and a console sparked, sending one of the crew sprawling. Hull breach, Sector 5. Someone shouted. Nanites are on it, but we're losing pressure. Seal it off, he growled, steadying himself against his chair. Focus fire on that dreadnought, port side, bearing 270. Take it down. The gravitic cannon sang again, and this time the dreadnought didn't just crack. It shattered, its midsection collapsing into a vortex of twisted metal and venting atmosphere. A cheer finally broke through the crew, ragged and defiant, but it was short-lived. The holo display lit up with new signatures, reinforcements pouring in from a jump point 10 clicks out. More ships, more guns. The Council wasn't playing anymore. Sir, the lieutenant said, her voice low, almost drowned by the alarms. We can't take them all. Not like this. He turned to her, saw the strain etched into her face, the same strain he felt in his bones. She wasn't wrong. The Ares was a marvel, but it wasn't invincible. Not yet. He clenched his fist, mind racing. Surrender wasn't an option. They'd dismantle the ship, lock the crew away, and bury humanity's defiance under a mountain of bureaucracy. Running might buy time, but where to? Earth wouldn't take them back. The colonies were too weak to hide them. We don't have to take them all, he said finally, a spark igniting in his chest. Just enough to make them regret this. She frowned, But before she could argue, the comms crackled again. This time it wasn't engineering. It was a signal, encrypted, human, and coming from deep space. An identified source, the comms officer reported, voice trembling. They're asking for you. Says it's about the Ares. He froze. A lifeline. A trap. Either way, it was a shift in the game. And right now, with the council bearing down and the ship bleeding, he'd take any chance he could get. Patch it through, he said. Let's see who's still betting on us. The static cleared, and a voice, human, rough, and impossibly familiar, filled the bridge. You're a hard man to find, Commander. Thought you might need a hand. The voice on the comms cut through the chaos like a blade, rough-edged and human, in a way that made the commander's skin prickle. For a moment, the blaring alarms and the shudder of the Ares ascendant under fire faded into the background. He knew that voice, gravelly, weathered, the kind that carried scars in every syllable. It belonged to a man he'd buried in his memory years ago, a ghost from a past he'd rather forget. But ghosts didn't hail warships in the middle of a firefight. Who is this? He demanded, his tone sharp enough to slice steel. Identify yourself. A low chuckle crackled through the static, unhurried despite the hell breaking loose around them. You've gotten grumpier, I'll give you that. It's me, you stubborn bastard. Thought you'd recognize an old friend. The commander's gut twisted. Old friend narrowed it down to a handful of names, most of them dead or scattered across the galaxy after the last war. But only one had the gall to sound amused while the council's fleet pounded the Ares into submission. You're supposed to be gone, he said, voice low. Off the grid. What the hell are you doing out here? Watching you stir the pot. Same as always, the voice replied. Saw the Ares light up the feeds. Couldn't resist. Figured you'd need a lifeline about now. The lieutenant spun from her console, eyes wide. Sir, incoming signatures, 5 ships, human transponders. They're closing fast from the jump point. Armed to the teeth. The hollow display flickered, confirming her words. 5 jagged silhouettes emerged from the void, their hulls patched and scared. Nothing like the pristine fleets of the council. Pirate rigs, maybe, or rogue colony cutters, vessels that screamed defiance in every dented plate. The commander's mind raced. Reinforcements? Out here. It didn't add up. Earth had disavowed them, and no colony had the spine or the firepower to challenge the council. Yet here they were, barreling toward the fight like they'd been waiting for the call. Friends of yours? The lieutenant asked, her tone laced with suspicion. Not sure yet, he muttered. Patch him through again. The comms flared back to life, like the surprise. Took some convincing, but I rounded up a few who still believe in what the Ares stands for. We're here to even the odds. Even the odds? The commander's laugh was bitter, edged with exhaustion. We're staring down a council armada. 5 ships won't change that. 5 ships and a plan, the voice shot back. You got the muscle, we got the guile. Trust me for once, will you? Trust. The word hit like a punch. He didn't trust easy. Not after Earth's betrayal. Not after years of watching allies turn tail when the heat came down. But the Ares was bleeding. Shields down to 60%. Nanites struggling to keep up with the damage. The council's dreadnoughts were regrouping, their cutters weaving tighter patterns, and those reinforcements wouldn't stop firing just because a few humans showed up late to the party. He didn't have the luxury of doubt. Fine, he growled. What's the play? Keep their attention, the voice said. Draw their fire. Push those fancy cannons of yours to the limit. We'll flank them, hit their supply line, their jump drives. They'll scatter when they realize they're stranded. It was reckless, insane even. The Ares could barely hold its own, and splitting the council's focus relied on perfect timing, something they hadn't had since this mess started. But the alternative was dying slow, and he'd never been one for drawn-out endings. Do it, he said to the lieutenant. Full power to weapons. Target their lead ships. Make them flinch. She didn't hesitate, her hands a blur across the controls. The Ares roared back to life, gravitic cannons spitting death into the void. Another Illyri cutter imploded, its wreckage spiraling into a dreadnought's path. The council fleet faltered, just for a heartbeat, and that's when the newcomers struck. The rogue ships darted in, fast and feral, unloading salvos into the enemy's rear. A supply frigate erupted in a plume of flame, its debris scattering like ash. The bridge crew let out a ragged cheer, but the commander didn't join them. He watched the hollow, saw the council adjust. Too fast, too smart. The dreadnoughts pivoted, their missile bays locking onto the new threat. The plan was working, but it was fragile, a house of cards in a storm. One wrong move, and they'd all be dust. Shields at 40%, the lieutenant reported, her voice tight. Cores spiking again. Engineering screaming red. Push it, he said, ignoring the dread creeping up his spine. We stop now, we're done. The Ares shuddered as another hit landed, a plasma lance carving a gash along its flank. The nanites swarmed, but slower now, their reserves thinning out. In the void, one of the rogue ships took a direct hit, its hull splitting open like overripe fruit. The comms crackled with a scream, then silence. The commander's jaw tightened, a cost he hadn't wanted to pay, but one he'd known was coming. They're breaking formation, the lieutenant said, a flicker of hope in her eyes. The council's pulling back their cutters. He looked to the hollow. She was right. The smaller ships were retreating, shielding the dreadnoughts as they lumbered toward the jump point. The plan was holding, barely. But the voice on the comms wasn't celebrating yet. Stay sharp, it warned. They're not running. They're regrouping. And they've got something big coming. The hollow pinged, a new signature blooming at the edge of the system, massive, sleek, and radiating power that dwarfed even the dreadnoughts. The commander's blood ran cold. He'd seen specs like that once in classified briefs. Council superweapon, a planet killer. They'd sworn never to deploy it. Until now. Guess they're done playing nice, he muttered, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Time to see what the Ares is really made of. The new signature on the hollow display pulsed like a heartbeat, a colossus of sleek metal and malice dwarfing everything else in the void. The commander stared at it, his breath catching for a split second before he forced it steady. He'd heard whispers of the Council's Ecliptor, a ship so monstrous they'd buried its existence under layers of denials and redacted files. A planet killer, they called it, though no one had seen it in action. Until now. Its silhouette was all sharp angles and glowing conduits, a predator built to end wars before they started, and it was here, sliding into the fray with a silence that felt more threatening than any roar. Status on that thing, he snapped, his voice cutting through the stunned quiet of the bridge. The lieutenant's fingers trembled as they danced over her console, pulling data from the Ares' sensors. It's massive, 3 times our size. Energy readings off the charts. Weapon signatures match nothing we got on file. Sir, it's charging something big. Big didn't cover it. The hollow zoomed in, showing a faint shimmer along the Ecliptor's bow, a distortion that screamed experimental tech, the kind that could vaporize the Ares and its ragtag allies in one shot. The commander's mind raced, piecing together scraps of intel from old briefings. If the rumors were true, that shimmer was a graviton lance, a weapon that didn't just destroy. It erased collapsing matter into nothing. The council hadn't just brought a hammer. They'd brought the end of the game. The comms crackled, the rough voice of their mysterious ally breaking through. You seeing this? That's their ace. Didn't think they'd pull it this fast. Yeah, I see it, the commander growled. You didn't mention a damned super weapon in your plan. Didn't know they'd bring it. The voice shot back, a hint of strain beneath the bravado. We've got a window minus 10 minutes, maybe less, before it fires. Hit it now, or we're all ash. Hit it with what? The lieutenant's voice was sharp, almost breaking. Shields are at 30%, cores on the edge of meltdown. We're barely holding off the dreadnoughts. The commander didn't answer right away. He stared at the Ecliptor, its bulk a taunt against the battered Ares. She was right. They were stretched thin, bleeding power and crew with every passing second. The rogue ships were still out there, harrying the council's flanks, but they were flies against a titan now. He could feel the weight of every eye on the bridge, waiting for him to pull a miracle out of the void. He'd gotten them this far on grit and gamble, but this was something else. Divert everything to the cannons, he said finally, his voice low but firm. All power, shields, thrusters, light support if you have to. One shot. The lieutenant's head snapped up, eyes wide. Sir, that'll leave us defenseless. If we miss, we won't miss, he cut her off. Make it count. She hesitated, just a heartbeat, then nodded. The bridge hummed as systems rerouted, the lights dimming to a sickly flicker. The Ares groaned under the strain, its frame trembling like a beast pushed past its limits. Out in the void, the Ecliptor's shimmer grew brighter, a promise of annihilation drawing closer. The commander gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles white. This was it, the line between defiance and oblivion. Cannons at critical, the lieutenant reported, her voice tight. Target locked. Firing on your mark. Now. The gravitic cannons unleashed a roar that shook the ship to its core, a wave of force so raw it felt like the Ares was tearing itself apart to deliver it. The blast ripped through the void, a distortion that warped light and space as it slammed into the ecliptor. For a moment, nothing, just silence, a hollow frozen mid-update. Then the super weapon buckled, its bow crumpling inward like a tin can under a boot. A chain reaction sparked along its hull, conduits burst, until the whole thing erupted in a blinding flash that whited out the viewport. The bridge erupted in shouts, relief, disbelief. But the commander didn't join them. He saw the cost on the lieutenant's console. Shields gone, core critical, half the ship dark. They'd hit the beast, but they gutted themselves to do it. And the council wasn't done. The comms buzzed again. "Nice shot," the voice said, ragged now. "But you've pissed them off. Dreadnoughts are coming back full burn. We're out of tricks." The hollow confirmed it. The remaining council ships, enraged or desperate, were charging in, weapons hot. The Ares was a sitting duck, its nanites too depleted to patch the gaping wounds. The commander leaned back, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. They'd taken down the ecliptor, proved the galaxy wrong about human limits. But survival, that was another fight. "Options," he said, turning to the lieutenant. She swallowed hard, scanning the readouts. "Cores at meltdown threshold. We could vent it, eject, and detonate. Might take a few of them with us. A suicide play." He hated it. Hated the thought of giving up the Ares after everything. But the crew, those 20 souls who'd followed him into this mess, deserved better than a quiet end. He glanced around, saw the exhaustion, the resolve. They'd known the risks. They'd chosen this. "Do it," he said. "Set the timer. Get everyone to the pods." The lieutenant moved fast, barking orders as the crew scrambled. The commander stayed where he was, eyes on the viewport. The Ares had been his defiance, his proof that humanity wouldn't bend. Now it'd be their torch, ablaze to light the galaxy's nightmares. As the evacuation klaxon wailed, he whispered to the ship, "You did good." The dreadnoughts closed in, oblivious to the trap ticking down in the dark. The evacuation pods jettisoned from the Ares ascendant like seeds scattered from a dying tree, each one a fragile hope against the void. The commander watched them streak away on the hollow display, his chest tight with something he wouldn't call fear. Not yet. The bridge was empty now, save for him and the lieutenant, who'd refused to leave her post. Her hand still hovered over the console, setting the quantum core's overload sequence, her jaw set in a line that said she wasn't asking permission to stay. "Pods are clear," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in the deck beneath them. "Cores at critical mass. Detonation in 90 seconds. He nodded, his gaze flicking to the viewport. The council's dreadnoughts loomed closer, their hulking forms blotting out the stars, cannons glowing with the promise of a quick end. They didn't know what was coming. A blast that would turn the Ares into a supernova, taking as many of them with it as physics allowed. It wasn't victory, not really, but it was something, a scar on the galaxy's face they wouldn't forget. "Should have gone with them," he said, not looking at her. "Someone had to push the button," she replied, a faint edge of defiance in her tone. "Besides, you didn't." He almost smiled. Almost. She was right. He couldn't leave the Ares, not after everything it had carried them through. It was more than a ship. It was their defiance, their rage, their proof that humanity wouldn't just roll over for the council's boot. If it was going down, he'd go with it. And she'd made the same call. The comms crackled, the rough voice of their ally breaking through one last time. "Pods are out. Good work. We're pulling back, drawing their fire. If you're still on that thing, get the hell off now." "Too late for that," the commander said, keeping his tone flat. "Make sure the crew gets clear. That's all that matters." A pause, then a curse muttered through the static. "You're a damned fool. Always were. Good luck, you crazy bastard." The line went dead, and the hollow showed the rogue ships veering off, luring a few of the dreadnoughts into a chase. It wouldn't save the Ares, but it might buy the pods time. That was enough. The commander settled into his chair, the deck vibrating as the core's whine grew deafening. 60 seconds. "You ever think it'd end like this?" the lieutenant asked, her voice softer now, almost lost in the noise. He glanced at her, saw the flicker of something human in her eyes. Regret, maybe, or just exhaustion. "Didn't think that far," he admitted. "Just wanted to hit back. Make them feel it." She nodded, like that was answer enough. "They'll feel this." The viewport flared as a dreadnought fired, a missile slamming into the Ares' flank. The ship lurched, console sparking, but the nanites were long past saving it. The core's timer ticked down, 30 seconds. The commander's mind drifted, unbidden, to Earth, to the brass who'd cut them loose, the colonies they'd fought for, the people who'd never know what this ship had done. He didn't hate them, not anymore. Hate took energy, and he was spent. 10 seconds, the lieutenant said, her voice cutting through the haze. She stood straighter, facing the viewport like she was daring the dreadnoughts to look her in the eye. He rose too, stepping beside her. The Ares trembled, its death throes shaking the air. 5 seconds. The dreadnoughts filled the view now, their cannons charging for the kill shot they'd never get to fire. 3, 2, 1. A hand grabbed his arm. Hard, real, not the ghost of memory. His vision blurred, then snapped into focus. He wasn't on the bridge. He was in a pod strapped tight, the lieutenant beside him, her face pale but alive. The Ares was a shrinking dot on a cracked view screen, the dreadnoughts swarming it like flies. A flash, brighter than any star, erupted, swallowing the ship and half the enemy fleet in a sphere of annihilation. The shockwave hit, rocking the pod, but it held. "What the hell?" he started, voice hoarse. "Remote trigger," she said, breathless. "Set it before we launched. You didn't think I'd let you stay, did you?" He stared at her, the weight of it sinking in. She dragged him off the bridge, overwritten his death wish with a stubbornness he hadn't seen coming. The Ares was gone, its final act a blaze of glory. But they weren't. Not yet. The pod's comms buzzed, the alley's voice cutting through. "You're alive. Damn it. I owe someone a drink. Rendezvous points ahead. Pods are safe, but the council's still out there. Move fast." The commander leaned back, the adrenaline fading into a dull ache. They'd lost the ship, but they'd gutted the enemy, bought time for the crew. It wasn't over. The council would hunt them, Earth would deny them, and the galaxy wouldn't forgive. But as the pod streaked toward the rogue ships, he felt a spark reignite. The Ares was dead. Its fight wasn't. "Get us there," he said, voice rough but steady. "We're not done yet." The pod rattled through the void, its hull creaking under the strain of a journey it wasn't built to endure. The commander sat strapped in, his hands clenched around the armrests, staring at the cracked view screen. The Ares ascendant was gone, a fading smear of light and debris on the sensor feed, its final explosion still echoing in his bones. Half the council's fleet had gone with it, dreadnoughts reduced to twisted husks drifting in the dark. A victory, maybe, if you could call losing everything a win. He didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow, like the ship had taken a piece of him when it blew. The lieutenant worked the pod's controls, her movements precise despite the sweat beading on her forehead. She'd saved him, dragged him off the bridge, triggered the core remotely, kept them both breathing when he'd been ready to burn. He hadn't thanked her yet, didn't know how. Words felt cheap against the weight of what they'd lost. "Rendezvous in 5 minutes," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the pod's struggling systems. "The others are already there, pods linked up with those rogue ships. We're the last ones." He grunted, his gaze shifting to the sensor display. The rogue fleet, or what was left of it, blipped faintly ahead, 5 battered hulks holding position near an asteroid cluster. Their alley's voice had promised safety, but safety was a lie out here. The council wouldn't let this slide. They'd lost their ecliptor, half their armada, and whatever pride they'd clung to. They'd hunt the Ares' crew to the edge of the galaxy, and Earth wouldn't lift a finger to stop it. Disavowed meant disposable. "You trust him?" she asked, not looking up from her console. "This guy who showed up out of nowhere?" "No," he said flatly. "But he's all we've got." She nodded, like that was enough. It wasn't, not really, but they'd run out of choices the moment the Ares launched. The pod shuddered again, a warning light flashing, fuel reserves dipping into the red. They'd make it, barely, if nothing went wrong. He didn't bet on that anymore. The comms buzzed, and the rough voice crackled through. "You're cutting it close. Dock's open. Get in quick. We've got company on the scopes." "Company?" The commander leaned forward, his gut tightening. "Council, not yet," the voice replied. "Scavengers, maybe, or worse. Point is, we're not sticking around to find out." The lieutenant adjusted their trajectory, the pod lurching toward the lead rogue ship, a hulking freighter with more patches than paint. Its bay yawned open, a dim maw swallowing them as they coasted in. The landing was rough, metal screeching against metal, but the clamps locked, and the pod powered down with a groan. For a moment, silence, then the hiss of the hatch as it unsealed. He unstrapped, rising stiffly, every muscle screaming from the fight. The lieutenant followed, her steps steady despite the shadows under her eyes. They stepped out into the freighter bay, a cavernous space lit by flickering strips, littered with crates and the stench of burnt wiring. Figures moved in the gloom, hardened men and women, armed and wary, their faces a mix of relief and suspicion as the pod's crews gathered. A man strode forward, tall and grizzled, his coat patched with colony insignia long faded. That voice in the flesh, older, rougher, but unmistakable. "You look like hell," he said, a crooked grin breaking through the scars. "Good to see you anyway." The commander didn't return the smile. "You've got a lot of explaining to do. Who are you running with? And why'd you stick your neck out for us?" The man's grin faded, his eyes sharpening. "Call it a debt. You and that ship, you lit a fire the galaxy needed. These folks," he gestured to the crew behind him. "They're the ones who've been waiting for it. Outcasts, rebels, people Earth forgot. We're